originally Palestinian with part background Lebanese based on my mom's side. I actually grew up in Malaysia, so I always come to know myself as a third culture kid. We immigrated to Canada in 2007 after I completed high school in Malaysia and after we received our immigration papers to Canada. So I've been here for a little more than 15 years, if my math is correct, and came to Canada as an undergrad student. So started my education at the University of Waterloo, did a master's at the University of Guelph, and then did my doctorate at the University of Saskatchewan. I think I have always been attracted to science. I had really great teachers in school, teachers who were very engaging and tried to do their best to engage us in the hands-on applications of science. So I had biology and chemistry teachers who would physically, do the experiments in the classrooms. And I even had like a biology teacher who tried to demonstrate how breathing works by blowing into a cow's lung. So these are things that really attracted me to science. And I'm more of a visual, hands-on person, and being able to apply something is really what I'm most capable of. So science was definitely the field that I liked. Am visually impaired. I have low vision. In Canada, I am considered legally blind. Sort of misleading in that when someone hears the word legally blind, they immediately think that's someone who can't see, but I can see. I have low vision. I might not be able to drive a car unless there's specific equipment that I'm using. But compared to a normal person, I might not be able to see further than 20 meters in front of me or something like that. I definitely, being someone who pursued science and the sciences is not exactly the most accessible field, is definitely there were challenges along the way, not so much in terms of retaining information or learning the material, because I was able to quickly learn, by reading by myself or by practicing by myself the theory, but more so in the applications and the hands-on laboratory experiments. And definitely, in school it was fine because my teachers always were able to provide accessible means or alternatives. In undergrad, it was a lot more challenging because it's the labs are a lot more generic, and it's difficult to find alternatives for one person without finding alternatives for everyone else in the classroom. I don't actually remember how I managed to complete my undergrad, especially the lab portions of my courses, but I did complete that. I'm sure I had help through my, teaching assistants and colleagues and other students, and I can't remember, it's been a long time. During my master's and doctorate, there were definitely more challenging portions of the degrees, just because it's more personal. These are degrees that I have to complete myself and research that I have to complete on my own. But I made sure that my supervisors were aware of the challenges that I might have, and tried to work with them to find alternatives. And, sometimes there are no alternatives, and it's basically knowing that, these are my limitations and I'm not going to be able to do this because of my vision. But let's see if there's, a different experiment or a different set of research goals we can approach. And I had supportive friends, definitely, who helped me throughout my lab, throughout my time in the lab, and made sure, I could approach them and was able to ask for support as needed. Anyone who has a disability, whether it's neurodiversity, or someone with like a physical disability, or anything, a learning disability, whatever it may be, there's always going to be a source of funding that is required to provide them with the accommodations that they need. The other simple thing, and I can speak from a STEM context, from a basic science context, because that's really my background, is research is very competitive. And when we have competitive programs, we sort of move away from the mindset of how do we create success for individuals to how do we publish and how do we get research done. And in this context, someone with a visual disability like myself, with low vision, who might not be able to successfully complete all the experiments required for a certain project, for example, we will come into a lab with the mindset that unless we're able to complete everything, we're not going to be successful in that lab. And I think that's where the problem comes, right? We have to be able to sit down and say, how do we work together? How do we collaborate as, researchers and scientists? And if there's something that I myself am not able to do, is there someone else that can sort of support me in that so that we can collaboratively work and finish the project? And I think that will it is a mindset, and it's becoming more common for collaboration to take place and for people to do different parts of a project. But because of the competitive nature of research, and when you're just entering your professorship or starting off as an assistant professor, there's just so much stress that you have to go through to try and prove yourself and to get into the ranks of associate and then full professor, that sometimes we aren't able to incorporate that into the lab setting or into for our students. So I think there's a lot of things that I can recommend being changed, but it's super difficult in a research context to remove that competitiveness, because everyone's competing for the sort of for funding, everyone's competing to get their papers out first. And we need to start focusing a little more, if we want to truly be inclusive and accessible, in how do we make our labs work together, and how do we make individuals work together so they're not competing against each other. And how is I'm not sure, like, this is a personal view, and this just comes from my experience. And how do we make people successful in what they do? And if that means changing the course of what they do and what others do, in terms of lab work, then maybe that's what we need to do. The most common misconception of someone who's visually impaired is, you know, they can't see, therefore they can't do, right? Um, it's really easy for me to hide my disability because I'm not actually fully blind. So if I'm just, unless you know me really well and you see me work, you're not going to know that I'm have a visual impairment aside from wearing my glasses, right? Um, but if you know me well, you'll know that I look at a screen very closely, that I have to read things up, very close. And I'm not able to drive unless unless I use bioptic lenses. And that's because I can't see writing from a distance. So there's a lot of the simple misconception is that if you're visually impaired, you can't see what you're doing. Therefore, you must be a hazard in certain situations. And I've seen that in a lab setting where, certain individuals see that you're visually impaired, so they assume that you're not going to be safe in the lab, and they start worrying, is this a hazard, is this a risk, is this going to be dangerous to have someone working in the lab. um, the the thing that people don't understand is that, as someone like me who's grown up with my disability, and it wasn't something that I had to learn to adapt to, I've become well aware of what my capabilities are and what my limitations are. And I'm quite honest with myself to know that if there is something that I can't do and I feel unsafe doing, I will, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to put myself or others at risk by doing something that I'm not comfortable doing. And when you work in a lab setting, if you're able to have these conversations with the supervisor that you work with, and your colleagues, then that's great, because then everyone knows, all right, I can do A, B, and C, but I'm not able to do D, so maybe I need support with that. I think be true and honest to yourself. Talk with individuals who've maybe experienced something similar, or experts who, are able to find you the supports and the networks that you need. They might not always be the right supports and networks, but as someone with a disability, we don't know until we try, to see what works best for us. Know that you're not going to know everything that works for you right off the bat. It's definitely always going to be a learning process to see how things work best for you, and what accommodations and needs you need to be successful. And in the end, I know there's always a stigma. Definitely exists. There's always going to be stereotypes, and at times we might feel that we don't want to share, with who we work with, that we have a disability, and we want to try and be independent and do things on our own. And I myself struggle with this. I know there is a stigma, and I myself are sometimes very hesitant about how can I approach this without, someone judging me right off the bat, and how can I get myself to be successful without disclosing that I have a disability. But I think if you're able to find the support system and the individual that is willing to have these conversations with you, it really goes a long way to supporting you, and to making sure that you are successful, and to ensuring that you can try. And if you fail, that's okay, because the individual will let you try again, and help you to become successful. The issues with STEM, especially the way we teach STEM, is that we focus a lot on, the material, and reading and memorizing. And in my mind, that's not a very accessible way to teach STEM, because everyone has a different learning method. So some of us are very visual, some of us are, we can look at words and we can remember them. Some of us are very hands-on, and we need to be able to touch things, and play with chemicals, and see how they work, and look at the reactions that happen. And in communities, especially in rural communities, and in communities that don't have a lot of resources, it's easy enough to bring books into a classroom, but it's a lot more challenging to be able to bring the materials that people need to see how things are working. And in science, especially the life sciences, and in my mind, I'm talking about biology, chemistry, physics. You have to be able to observe the theory that you're learning. Otherwise, it's basically just a theory, right? You're not able to apply what you learn unless you actually see it visually. And for me, as a visual learner, this is exactly how I learned. I wasn't good at memorizing, but if you tell me to set up a reaction, and see the outcomes of the reaction, I could learn very easily. And when we talk about communities where STEM is not a priority, especially because it's a lot more difficult to get STEM teachers who stay there in these communities, we need to think of resources and teaching methods that allow students to be engaged in the process, and to be active in the process, so that it's like an active learning sort of methodology. And pardon my, I don't have the pedagogy of education. I am not a teacher, so I don't have the words to use, but it's more about how can we bring science into these classrooms so that students are engaged in them, and so they're just not sitting behind a desk learning from a textbook. And then the other aspect is, how can we prepare the teachers to be successful in teaching science in an engaging way? So it's easy for a teacher to go and say, okay, we're going to read chapters 1, 2, and 3 today, and we're going to sort of do exercises A, B, and C. But what equipment and resources can we provide the teacher so that they can incorporate hands-on activities in the classroom? And it's not about buying expensive equipment, or ensuring that they have all these fancy chemicals to use. It's about what resources can we prepare for them to incorporate in their classroom that they can easily access. So, they in rural communities and northern communities, it's a lot more challenging to bring in chemicals. It's a lot more challenging to bring in specific equipment. So, can they go to a grocery store and find the equipment, the resources that they need to do the experiment to show how something works? And so that's a lot where my passion lies. It's about how do we make science more accessible, not just for individuals with disabilities, but for communities, just to, increase that level of engagement and increase their passion and understanding of the sciences.